but I want to go through and talk a little bit about Congress, committees, and responsibilities. There we go. All right, sorry about that, just a little delay in getting started. At any rate, we're going to talk about some of the roles that our committees take on and some of the other responsibilities that Congress has above and beyond just passing law. And so we'll get started with the committees. And one of the things we have to keep in mind with the role of Congress is that it's a pretty big group. You know, the House has 435, the Senate has 100, but they are doing or dealing with a lot of different elements to their jobs. And you know, beyond legislation and passing law, there's a lot of other pieces to the puzzle. And so the reason that we establish and set up congressional committees is so that we can divide the workload. And one of the things that does is it allows the Congress persons to focus on areas that they're good at, and it also allows them to determine what's important. And again, this really can allow them to sink their teeth into certain issues that are coming up, and especially things that might be important to them and or their constituents that they represent. And we'll get to that element a little bit later in the lecture, but just this idea that they can spread out the work, find out what's important. And then also in committees, you're going to see them investigate particular issues that might be important. And again, if even this could be a very simple element. You know, if there's some part that comes up in a bill and there's some questions as to whether the facts that are being presented are correct, or if there needs to be research done into determining the facts that go with how this legislation might affect our country, they might have to investigate that as part of their committee work to determine if this is the right way to approach a problem. So again, it's a good process. It's one that's set up again to help spread out the work, and again, it really does help us to focus on the issues and the many that are there. Now, how are these committees made up? How is this process put together? Well, the membership of the committees is done based on party membership, and what that means is that if the House or the Senate is made up of 60% Republican and 40% Democrat, then every single committee would match that level of membership as far as each individual party is concerned. It's also important to note that as in regards to the political parties, is that the committee chairs and the assignments to the committee are all done by political parties. And so if the Republicans hold a majority in the House, they choose every committee chair and they do all the assignments for their party. The Democrats would assign their representatives to each individual committee as well, but they would not have the ability to choose a committee chair. The committee chairperson becomes very valuable because they control key decisions and they control the debate that's going on. So even to the point of the calendar, if a bill gets placed into committee and that particular chairperson doesn't like or agree with the topic, then they can choose not to address it in committee and they can bury it right there. And there's certainly that opportunity to do that for the members of Congress. Now, the other thing that's kind of unique about assignments for committee chairpersons is that it's done by seniority. Generally, not always, but it's predominantly done by seniority. So if a senator or congressman wants a job on a particular committee, or even better, the committee chair spot, they get it if they've been there the longest. Now, on the outside looking in from a positive perspective, hey, well, it makes sense. You've been there the longest, you've earned your keep, it's easy to apply. And then also it avoids party fighting from within, because it's very clear, hey, you've been here longer, you get the spot. The downside to this is that it somewhat ignores ability. You know, if you get someone who's really talented in a particular area or particular field, they may not have the opportunity to kind of really use that talent because they just are new. And then the other element you have is it might create similar viewpoints. You got a lot of people that are a little bit older, a little bit more experienced, and again, as we grow older, we tend to become a little bit more conservative. Not in every viewpoint, but maybe your viewpoints are based on things that, again, a younger generation may not agree with. So that can be a little bit problematic as well. However, the key is that the party in power is making these decisions. And again, it's not a constitutional thing, it's just been done by practice over a period of time. There are 4 different types of committees in Congress. The first is standing committees. These are the ones that every congressman, every senator is going to be assigned to, and these are our permanent groups, and their job is to oversee specific issues. So, for example, there's a committee on defense. There's a committee on agriculture, urban and housing, urban development. There's a variety of them, and the Senate has their own, and the House of Representatives has their own. Now, this is another place where the committee chair or the committee spots that you get are important. Where are you from? Who do you represent? If you represent the Central Valley of California, in and around Fresno, it might be important for you to try and get on that agricultural committee. That's what the people in your district do. And so we want to make sure that they're representing them. For a representative from Orange County, that might not be quite as important. We don't care as much about the agricultural elements, and so that person might want to be on the finance or judiciary committee, something that applies to Orange County. We also have select committees. Again, these are set up individually. In other words, the House of Representatives have some, and the Senate has some, and they're around to deal with specific concerns. I use the example of terrorism here just because it's certainly in our mindset, but there have been temporary committees set up on any number of topics that might be worth addressing. But again, they're short term. They're not going to last forever, and they're done, again, to deal with something specific. We also have joint committees, and again, these are the committees of both houses. They tend to deal with routine issues. So they'll have some senators, some congresspersons in there, and they'll deal with routine things. Library of Congress comes to mind. For us in California, one thing that comes to mind is there's a joint committee that deals with inaugurations, whether that's the president or any of the federal judges. And the reason I mentioned California is because Nancy Pelosi is the chairperson of that particular committee. We also have something called conference committees, and these are kind of unique in that they deal with both houses, both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and they deal with the following problem, and that is sometimes a bill or a piece of legislation will go through the Senate and get passed, and then it will go through the House, but it will be a little bit different. It's not the exact same wording, it's not the exact same information. There will be minor changes that are there, and so the conference committees will get together, members of both groups, and try and come up with some kind of compromise to make sure these bills fit together. Again, this happens actually rather frequently, and this allows the process to not get bogged down by having to restart. And again, if this is really important, if you've got maybe one House that's made up of Republicans and the other that's made up of Democrats, and those conflicts can potentially get worked out there as well. So the conference committees are pretty important as well to deal with these issues on bills. Before we go into taxing and spending, I just want to kind of point out the first question I'm going to ask, and again, we'll put the thing in the drop box here. You can answer your questions on there, and it's going to relate. In fact, I'll go back to the slide, but I'm going to ask you a question about committees, and what I would like you to do is I want you to look up a list of standing committees in the House of Representatives, not the Senate, in House of Representatives, and I want you to think about the community you live in, and I want you to tell me 3 committees you think it might be good to, if your congressperson was in them. In other words, based on Orange County or wherever you live. In fact, why don't you mention that in there so we know, but put in the city and where you live, and then tell me what some of the committees are. 3 committees, standing committees, and you're gonna have to look those up to get them. Okay, taxing and spending. This is where we start to see the real important elements to this, but taxing and spending become very important, and certainly in current times, this whole issue of where where money should be spent and how it should be spent and what our taxes are going to look like is on the forefront of everyone's mind, and especially since we've sort of been in an ongoing recession. But one thing that's important to know is that any bills that are dealing with revenue, so really this is our tax issue, have to start in the House of Representatives. The Senate does not get to do that. It's done with the House. And the reason that was done is because the representatives, the House of Representatives, are the only people that were initially written in the Constitution that were directly elected by the people. And if you want to get into the whole issue of taxation without representation, this sort of solves that problem, because hey, if we're directly electing these people, they're representing us, and so we do have representation. So that's why it was established in the Constitution that revenue bills start in the House of Representatives. Bills that deal with appropriations or spending can come from either. So again, an allotment of money that's going to be used for whatever, education, building new roads, etc. That can come from either location. It's also kind of interesting to note that the budget, the annual budget, is typically put together by the president. Again, this has to do a little bit with the fact that and it's done in conjunction with Congress, but ultimately the president's responsibility is to execute law. And so Congress may have ideas about expenditures, but the president is going to use the real numbers to try and put these things together. It is, again, the Congress does have to approve the budget, and both, obviously the president have to sign off on it, but that process alone can be a little bit difficult to deal with. But again, the actual spending of bills and the pushing out of those things is something that either the House or the Senate can do. Other elements of responsibilities, and again, in regards to taxing and spending, certainly has to deal with commerce. And it's written in the Constitution that the federal government is going to be responsible for interstate commerce, things that travel from one state to another. Well, that's led into a lot of other things. We've already looked at a little bit in our class previously with cases like U.S. v. Lopez and Hammer v. Dagenhart as they relate to different issues. Here's two more cases, though, that are really important to the interstate commerce element. And the first one is Gibbons v. Ogden. And what had happened here is that both these groups, Gibbons and Ogden, had gotten licenses to run ferry boats from New York to New Jersey. And Gibbons had gotten his license from the state of New York, and Ogden had received his from the United States government. And so basically this case, they sued each other to determine who should actually have a right to move the people across between those two states. So the case went through the court system, ends up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled two very important things here. So there's really two precedents. First is that people are commerce, in the sense of if we're transporting people across state lines, that the federal government would be responsible for those people, and that would become commerce. In this case, we're ferrying them in a boat, but certainly this is why the federal government is involved with things like the TSA and their role in making sure that people are safe when they get onto airplanes. That's a federal issue because that's federal commerce. It's not a state-run organization, it's a federal organization. So that's the first precedence of this case. Second one is it really did establish the federal government's control over interstate commerce. So this was the case that sort of legitimized the line in the Constitution that the Congress is, or the federal government's responsible for interstate commerce, because Ogden won the case. So that's our first one. Another one, and I think the second case that I've listed here, is just sort of interesting as this idea of interstate commerce has started to get extrapolated to mean new things. And this was a case of the Heart of Atlanta Motel versus United States. And basically the Heart of Atlanta Motel was violating some of our civil rights acts of the 1960s by not allowing African Americans to stay in their places, and if they were staying there, having them just in specific rooms. And so the United States sued the Heart of Atlanta Motel, and their rationale for doing this was that motels and restaurants and things of that nature are interstate commerce by their nature, right? And again, we see that a lot in Orange County with Disneyland nearby campus here. That when you go to a restaurant there or a hotel there, obviously there's going to be a lot of people there from different states and even different countries. But at this time, we're dealing with different states. And so because of that, the United States government, when you deal with hotels, motels, restaurants, that's interstate commerce. And so the United States federal law applies. And so that's why we run into this interstate commerce element, just sort of being taken a step further in the Heart of Atlanta Motel versus United States case. One of the things that I would like to do for question number 2, sorry that I jumped ahead there, so this will be our second question in this lecture, is this concept of revenue generation in the House of Representatives. I want you to kind of give me an idea. Again, this is a little bit of an opinion perspective, but why does this maybe make it more valuable to be a member of the House of Representatives? Not valuable, maybe more respectable to be a member of the House than of the Senate? Again, just give me a 1 or 2 sentence answer to that. Why do you think? What is it about that idea of generating revenue, and why is that so important to our country that it would maybe make a House member feel like they were maybe a little bit more respectable? Okay, moving along, talking about some of the non-legislative powers. And many of these are going to go through kind of quickly because they're also parts of our checks and balances system. But certainly our legislative branch, our congressional, the 2 houses have an opportunity to remove people from office, and we call that impeachment. Obviously, we've touched on this a little bit previously in class, but this idea that they can impeach a president, impeach a federal judge, and they have the power to do so is a very critical element. Again, this is not one that's taken lightly. This is a big deal if you're going to go through the process of impeachment. The Senate also has a role in confirmation and ratification. Again, these are not roles of the House, these are roles of the Senate, and that confirmation power is one of our checks and balances, and their job is to confirm cabinet members and federal judges and other people that are placed into office by our president. And again, this is a pretty important thing, and again, this is also one that becomes can be very contentious, especially when you're putting in federal judges, because they're in that job for their life. That's a lifetime position, and so the Senate will take this very seriously. And then also they have this power of ratification. Any treaty that needs to be passed, the Senate again would have to approve it. So the president can go out and negotiate a treaty, but then the Senate has to approve of that treaty. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit of story here really quickly about Woodrow Wilson. And if you guys remember, Woodrow Wilson went out and negotiated the Treaty of Versailles to help end World War I. And he put together this 19-point plan. And one of those points at the end of the World War I was to have a League of Nations. And that League of Nations would sort of work together to help try and control conflict around the world. Well, when President Wilson came home to the United States, he got very sick and was unable to really express his rationale to the Senate to get that treaty ratified. And the Senate disagreed and actually ended up not agreeing to be part of that League of Nations. And so that whole process broke down, and then ultimately led to the ability for Germany to sort of regain some of their power, and then, of course, as you know, start World War II. So my third question here for you guys is this. Do some of these checks and balances actually hurt our government? Is there a way that that maybe could have been handled differently? You know, obviously in this case it led to a war, but what do you think? Is this an appropriate, I mean, is it okay for us to have a second world war because of the way our government's set up? Or is there a better way to do this? So again, just kind of answer me that question as number 3. Are these processes of checks and balances here, the confirmation, the removal, the ratification, are these appropriate powers, and are they best serving our government? Finally, we're going to talk about investigations, and Congress has over the years taken on 2 roles in regards to investigations. Sometimes, again, it's in regards to some specific thing that's going on, and it can seem sort of trivial. And my example I use here is Quiz Show, and this is actually the name of a movie. But what happened is that in the, I want to say late 50s, early 60s, the Oversight Committee in Congress decided to investigate the game show, a TV game show called 21. And what was happening here on this show was that the producers of the show, the people who were making the show, the sponsors, were finding contestants that they liked and giving them the answers so that they could win and continue to earn money. So they were basically cheating, and again, it worked out good for those contestants because you know, they're making money, but obviously the people who were not winning were not being treated and were losing. So there was this whole process of an investigation that took place to find out if that was actually going on, and it did turn out that it was. And again, it's changed the rules for game shows. They have to, you know, now they have to kind of follow the same rules and not give answers to people. However, you may not know this, but in the game show like Jeopardy, where you're in a Q&A type show, they do give the categories away, and they give the contestants access to the same research so that they know where the answers or questions may come from. So that's kind of one area that they may investigate. Again, things like steroid use is a little more common in more recent times. We've dealt with that steroids in baseball. There have been dealings in that area. Even issues in, I believe, in the National Football League over concussions. There was some congressional investigation into that. Again, that may seem like a waste of time for the whole country to be spending money on it, and you might be right. But those are things that people care about in our country, and so they tend to investigate things because that's what their constituents want. And then finally, there's legislative oversight. And this is the job to make sure that the executive is upholding laws appropriately. And again, the president does have some power to sort of manipulate and change some of these laws that are put into place. Again, this can be maybe holding back money for certain things that they're trying to fund, or maybe not, really putting all efforts into a particular program that they may disagree with. So the legislative branch can come in and basically call them out, investigate and show that this is something that's going on. And they can also investigate each other. It is important for the parties and the people in office to make sure that they're doing things correctly, and so that becomes something that's worth investigating. They may well do so. All right, here we go. Last question as we finish up this particular lecture is going to be in regards to investigations. Is there some issue, is there something that you can think of that's going on in our country that may need investigation? It can be somewhat trivial, and maybe it does just relate to you, but maybe that means that your congressperson should be paying attention. So I want you to just think of some particular issue that may be out there that maybe needs to be investigated, something that doesn't seem equitable in our society, and just make a note of it here, and then also give me a reason as to why you chose that particular topic. Okay? Thanks a lot. We'll put all those questions, those 4 questions, can be dropped right into the Dropbox in our MyOlu studio, and appreciate your time.